doing, sir?
Good. What's up?
Yeah, so I mean, I had a couple questions. I'll ask you a question, Darth. But if you're interested, we could always have a discussion another time. I think we could have a decent discussion.
I'm perfectly fine with that. And if it doesn't go well here, according to dancing's rules, because this is his room, we can always carry on some other time, today or tomorrow. In another room. But
Okay.
this is his room, so he makes the rules.
Yeah, no problem. So, you talk a lot about the Trinity, and that's why I wanted to ask you the question. I actually, before I asked that, I was listening to your comments about R.T. Mullins, and he's actually a good friend of mine. So if you ever wanted to reach out to him, maybe I could try to arrange
Oh,
something if you're interested.
that would be very nice because so far, and like I said, I'm not giving a blanket endorsement because I don't know enough about him. But what I have
Yeah,
read so far and the videos that I have watched of him, I am greatly impressed by him. And I can truly say to you that in my entire Christian life, it's one among a number of instances where I can say I'm truly blessed to learn from somebody who's super smart and educated on such a topic.
yeah, he's a really nice guy as well. I
Yeah.
recently met him in person and had lunch with him, so he's a good friend.
Oh, wow.
And
Wow.
yeah,
Lucky you.
yeah. So I just want to affirm pretty much everything you said about Ryan before I came on and went into the
Oh, that's
Trinity
nice.
discussion. And if you had any questions about it, if you want
Matrix.
here.
I didn't get. I don't know about anybody else, but I didn't hear anything you just said. Hello.
Can I be heard?
I can hear
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, sorry guys. I'm just on my way home from work, so I got some spotty connection in certain areas. So if I cut out, just give it a second for me to come back. So Darth, yeah, my question for you is on the nature of God and the Trinity. I'm wondering how you understand the relationship between the Father and God, or the persons in God. So, like when you say the Father is God, do you believe that the Father is identical to God?
No, I believe that the Father, the Son, and the Spirit, when we speak of their each discrete distinctiveness, that when we say that they're God, we're speaking qualitatively, not quantitatively.
Okay. So, are you familiar with the distinction between what's called the is of predication and the is of identity? And I'm just
Yes.
asking because I think,
Yeah.
okay,
Yes.
so you would be using it in a predicative sense. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, in the New Testament, sometimes it's referring to God, that's what is invoked as God is sometimes referring to as identity, or as I like to say quantitatively, and sometimes it's referring it qualitatively. So for example, when it says in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, it's using the
Yeah.
word God there in a slightly different nuance. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay. So the God that he was with is an entity that is qualitatively God, and he himself is qualitatively God. He was with God and he was God because he was qualitatively God.
Right. Were you finished or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. So when you say the Father is God, like that's a predicate which is being ascribed to the subject, which is the Father. So it's something like the Father is divine, and we would say the same thing for the Son and the Spirit likewise, right?
The Father possesses one or more attributes that only God can possess.
Okay. So what makes him God is the attributes, like the omnis and presumably whatever else you had in mind. That would
Well,
with making God,
whenever,
right?
well, from the Christian position, we can never speak exhaustively of God. So when we do speak of God, we're speaking uh, analogically about God because we're not omniscient. Okay, and so when God communicates to us, He's not communicating to us what He is exhaustively, because we would have to have the divine qualities of omniscience in order to do that. So in whatever way we speak of God, it's going to be analogical and not exhaustive, or as one theologian puts it, in a univocal way. So
Right.
so
Yeah,
if you're
yeah, I
going to
understand.
if you're going to try to use logic to defeat the doctrine of Trinity, it's not going to go well, because um, logic only goes so far, um, because trying to grasp God, we can only grasp God insofar as He reveals Himself analogically, because He doesn't reveal Himself exhaustively. So if you try to use logic, it might be the case that you have a misapprehension of logic.
Uh-huh.
Now, so if you're going to say that whatever line of logical reason that you're employing, then I will ask you, in order to defeat a worldview, and in this case, a world where we have a Trinitarian God, you're going to have to do so by your own worldview, which is explicit or implicit, when you use any type of reasoning that is derived from that world, that God. So if I'm using any kind of logic or reason to defeat another position, it's always going to be rooted in the mind of God and how He reveals it. So if you're going to attempt to use any type of logical reasoning, I'm going to ask you, what is the root and ground of that logic and reason?
Yeah, because if it's anything other than in the mind of God or God Himself, then
Yeah.
that's not going to work.
There are times that people, and we've all been guilty of this, including myself, where we think certain lines of reasoning is logical, and then it turns out down the road that there's a more accurate way of understanding something, and so you displace your previous logical thinking. Like, for example, after studying some material on the nature of time vis-a-vis God, I held to the idea that, the logical position was that God was timeless, and then God becomes temporal with creation. I now reject that as not logical, because there is a better way of understanding it that is more logical. Okay, so if you're going to use logic, I'm going to at least want to know, what is your source for logic? Because if you ask me my logic, my source for logic will be in virtue of the mind of God, that is the Christian God, and how He reveals it directly or indirectly. So your source of logic would be Allah.
That's a question, Muslim.
Yeah, is your source of logic Allah?
Okay.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
cut out, Darth, when you were talking last time. I'm sorry, but I missed about the last 2 minutes of it.
Not
Um,
a problem.
so
Yeah, the
I heard
difference
what you were
between,
saying about
yeah,
logic and God. Obviously, logic is grounded in
yeah,
God, and
yeah.
it's speaking
See,
analogically of God and all these things.
the
But
difference,
my question
yeah. Go
my
ahead.
question for you is just that, I understand what you're saying, and there may be a problem with our reasoning and the fact that God is incomprehensible in a certain extent, which we can all agree with. Um, but presumably, you don't
You're in the Matrix.
believe
You're in the Matrix.
that.
Dang it. This is like the smartest Muslim we've ever come across on Clubhouse, and I wanted to
Okay,
hear from him.
well, there'll be time in the future when he has a better connection. I'll just talk while he's waiting for a better
Can you hear
connection.
me now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay, sorry. So yeah, so I'm saying presumably we don't believe that God is like a contradiction or
this is becoming a comedy bit very quickly.
Well, this is a God thing, I think. I think maybe it's a sign.
Well, the difference between our view, us Bible believing fundamentalist Christians, and the Muslims is because they hold to a strictly Unitarian conception of God. And so, since they consider God being a Unitarian being, is the ground of all being, anything that would be in conflict with that is to be rejected as illogical. So, what they're going to do is, because they're starting from an a priori position of a Unitarian view of God, and we're starting from an a priori view that God is Trinitarian, in the sense that we start with that as our fundamental presupposition because of God revealing himself. They're going to want to conceive that it's illogical, right? But all I have to do is simply ask a question: can something be both unified and diverse, or does it have to be one or the other? So, is something exemplified by its unity that has a greater ultimacy than its diversity, or no diversity at all? Or does diversity have supremacy over any alleged unity? So we would call that ultimacy.
Well, if you, not you, but if anybody reads the scriptures, knows that and has to believe that God is ultimacy, period, because the
Mm-hmm.
scriptures does teach and does say how God doesn't desire that any should perish, but that all would come to repentance. But we also read that God hates the sinner, not just the sin, but the sinner. We also see that God decrees and has decreed those unto condemnation, and yet at the same time, for God so loved the world that he gave his own begotten son. The problem that a lot of people have is that they seem to be forced, or feel as if they're forced, that they have to choose one over the other, instead of saying, you know what, they're both true. God does love and God does hate. He does both perfectly. At the root of even the hate and the jealousy of such, at the root of that, a just God is love. So it's not a contradiction. It's not illogical. They're both true. So I think that's kind of like, in a way, what you're saying too.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to say that it was contradictory. In fact, I'm just asking what Darth's position is in certain instances on the Trinity, because there are different conceptions or models of it. And I'm just wondering what his view is. So, Darth, would you conceive of the divine essence or nature, whatever term you'd like to give for it, would you conceive of it as a universal?
Um, one could characterize God as the concrete universal, meaning that all things that are not God universally derive and depend upon him.
Could you explain that more? Because I'm just trying to understand like what you mean by that. I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
the idea of like a universal is either derived from or influenced from idealism and philosophy, something that I'm just beginning to learn about. Okay, so in
Yeah.
idealism, they talk about things like a concrete universal versus an abstract universal. Now, when people hear this, they conflate abstract, meaning to be fictional. Well, in a sense, that's true, but in a sense that it's not. So there are certain singular things that we will invoke that are not a concrete one, but are an abstract one, whereas the abstract one is simply a collectivization of a plurality of things under a single unified term.
Hmm.
But that single unified term doesn't exist as a concrete one in terms of actuality. Okay, the one thing in question is actually a plurality of two or more things. So this goes back to the one and the many problem in philosophy. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so in the one and the many problem, and I know you know this, and this is for the benefit of people in the audience. The perennial question in philosophy is, what is the ultimate nature of the sum of all things? Okay, is it in its unity or is it in its diversity? Well, in the Christian worldview, the answer is the God of the Bible is that, but he is the one and the many, and his unity and diversity exist within himself with equal ultimacy. He then creates the world that reflects this characteristic of himself, where we have unification and we also have diversity in the world, and consequently we have intelligibility.
Hmm. Yeah, I get that. So, I mean, you're saying that God is a concrete particular, but the way that I'm understanding it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the divine nature is a universal, which is instantiated in three particulars: the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and that they each fully possess the divine nature. Would you agree with that?
No, they possess the divine nature in that they possess attributes that only God can have. So when we say they possesses the
Yeah.
divine nature, again, we have to be careful here. What is meant by the divine nature? Does it mean the sum total and everything and all that God is? Or are we saying that it possesses divine nature, that the thing in question possesses one or more attributes that only God can have?
Yeah, and presumably you're saying that they possess certain attributes that are necessary and sufficient in order to
Right.
be called
So
God.
does the Trinity possess omniscience? Well, from a Christian perspective, the answer would be yes. If we get into greater specificity and we say, does Jesus or the Spirit or the Father possess omniscience? We would say yes. So they all possess an attribute when we're talking about God. Remember, we're always speaking analogically about God and not univocally, because in order to speak univocally, which would mean one and only one thing,
Yeah.
then we would have to speak exhaustively. But we cannot speak exhaustively of God because we would have to be God in order to do so. So
Hmm.
when God communicates to us, he speaks analogically. So when we speak about God in terms of how he's revealed himself, then we have an analogical understanding. Okay. Now
Hmm.
the point is this. I'm going to ask you a question.
Yeah.
If you take if and this doesn't prove the doctrine of the Trinity, but it helps to illustrate the issue. Okay, so take a cube, right? We
Hmm.
could say that a cube is a unified entity, but that when we think about it more deeply, we can say that the cube itself, as extended in time and space, is in a time index, mind you. Uh,
Hmm.
that unified being it has three distinctions to it. It has three dimensions. Now, each dimension is distinct, but cannot exist in separation from the other two dimensions. So, in a cube, we have unity and diversity that are equally ultimate. And therefore, we have the ontology, the actuality or ontology of the cube and its intelligibility.
Darth, can you just repeat what were the three aspects of the cube again that you said?
You could say length, width, height, or depth.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, but I mean, in that case, yeah, you have one object with three aspects, but
It
um,
has three distinctions,
yeah, yeah,
and
three
that
distinctions.
the cube as a unit as a unified entity cannot be properly conceptualized ontologically and in terms of intelligibility if we don't also understand that it exists with three distinctions or dimensions. So
Yeah.
the cube exemplifies an entity that is both actual and intelligible, and it's only actual and intelligible by virtue of its unity and diversity.
Right. Now, so when you were relating that to the Trinity and you brought up the example of omniscience, and you said that the Trinity was omniscient, and then likewise the Father, Son, Holy Spirit were as well, there's a potential concern there about now it seems like you have four things which are divine in some sense. You have the Trinity, and then you have the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so you have for things which are
No,
divine. So what would you say in
no,
regard to that?
I don't
no,
understand that.
no,
What do you mean by that?
no.
That doesn't make sense.
The Trinity, God's unity and his diversity are equally ultimate. Okay, so there. Remember, when we're speaking of God, okay, from a biblical perspective, we are always speaking analogically, and this is very important to understand. Okay, so when we speak of God,
Hmm.
we're speaking analogically. We're not speaking univocally or exhaustively, right? God is communicating to us in a way that is not exhaustive. Okay, so it's an analog of what he is. So
Yeah.
God has to speak to us from various perspectives. So, for example, when you view an object, you are not viewing an object from all perspectives, are you?
No, not as a human being. Certainly not.
Right, right. So you're going to be limited in your ability to um, apprehend what something is. Something is what it is from all perspectives or from God's point of view. But when we speak of things, we're not speaking exhaust. Look, like I'm looking at my laptop right now. When I refer to the laptop, that I'm not speaking of it exhaustively, right? So when we invoke things, we're speaking of things from a certain perspective. But since we're
Yeah.
not God, we can never invoke terms, a single or multiple terms, which are going to incorporate all aspects or perspectives of what something is, meaning exhaustively. So when we speak of God, and we can't speak exhaustively, we're always going to have to speak of God from a particular perspective, which is limited by our humanness. Okay?
Yeah.
So one perspective is that God is an entirely unified being, but God is also a being that is diversified. Now, somebody might come
Hmm.
along and say, well, that's a contradiction. Say, well, is a cube a contradiction?
Yeah. No, I don't think that's a
That was
contradiction.
good. That was good. Thanks. That was all.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was good, man.
Yeah. No, I
Yeah,
agree with you,
I
Doc.
mean, yeah,
So
yeah.
the world around us,
Deuteronomy,
the world around
Deuteronomy.
us is,
Hold on.
yeah,
Oh, I'm sorry.
yeah.
What?
Now go ahead.
Deuteronomy. If you read Deuteronomy 29:29, it speaks about things that are secret that belong to God. It says secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed, those things that He reveals to us, those are the things that we should meditate on. Those things that we should pass on. So there are things that belong to God and God alone, and if God so chooses to reveal them, He will. I believe it was Jonathan Edwards did a writing on Deuteronomy 29:29, and it's almost like it also speaks of if you seek those things. I'm paraphrasing probably poorly, but if you seek to try to understand or apprehend those things that belong to God, I believe it's called being arrogant, and you at the same time should seek the deeper things of the Creator, and like the Bereans, search the Scriptures to see if these things that are being said are so. But there are things that actually do belong to God and God alone, and not to us, and we may never
Right.
come to fully comprehensively understand. But God has revealed
Yeah.
Himself, His attributes, and His character through His Word.
Well, I
So when we
certainly agree
speak,
with that.
so when we speak about anything, including God, because of our human limitations, our epistemic situation, because we're not omniscient, we're going to invoke things in terms of a perspective. Okay? There's even a theologian, John Frame, who has a concept called multi-perspectivalism, right? Which I want to do some further reading on because I have a lot of respect for him. But so when we speak about anything, including God, when we use words, we're speaking analogically and we're speaking from a particular perspective. When you're looking at a cube, you're always looking at a cube from a particular perspective. You're not looking at it from every perspective, nor could you unless you are God. Right? So for
Right.
example, I don't know how familiar you are. I use a lot of American illustrations because, of course, I'm American. What country are you from?
I'm American.
Okay. Okay. So, for example, you ever seen the TV show American Pickers?
Yes.
Okay. Frequently, they'll find antique stuff to sell in the store, and occasionally they'll find an old antique car in the barn somewhere. And when they'll call an expert as to whether they should buy it or not, and they'll send some pictures. But even the snapshots themselves only have limited perspective. And so what the expert will say, well, does it have this? Does it have that? Does it have this, like this? So whenever we're speaking of something, we can never speak exhaustively of what that antique car is. So whatever terms that we're using in a particular proposition, it's always going to be a snapshot or an isolated perspective, not to the exclusion of other perspectives that in totality would exhaustively represent it. The same is true of God.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
the problem with a lot of Muslims, as I see it, is because they have an ironclad grip on the idea that God is Unitarian. Therefore, any other expression that is where God is not Unitarian, well, then it's got to be illogical. It's got to be wrong. Well, based
Yeah.
upon what?
I mean, certainly, I'm sure some Muslims may come across that way, but that's certainly not my position. Um, I obviously I have my own concerns, but yeah, I'm agreeing with a lot of what you're saying, Darth. I think my concern is this idea when you're talking about the Trinity being omniscient, and then you have these three other perspectives or aspects or however you want to frame it, which are also omniscient. And I'm saying in that case you have four instances of
No,
omniscience.
No.
no, it's not
Um,
four instances. It is four or more instances of invoking a perspective.
In the same way you were talking about with the cube, right? With length, width, and depth, and
Well, that's correct. Or if we're talking about, let's say, a Model T car or an antique car in a barn find, whenever we're speaking of something,
Mhm.
it's from a particular perspective, and it's never, look, if I say my laptop or my keyboard or my phone or the
Yeah,
sneakers on my feet, okay, these are terms which attempt to exemplify what something is in part, because we cannot invoke what something is exhaustively in a single term or even a proposition, because if we did, we would be God, wouldn't we?
yeah. No, I think we're definitely in agreement
Right.
there. There's yeah,
So when we speak of God, we cannot speak of God exhaustively, because only
right.
God himself can appropriate exhaustive self consciousness of himself and understanding. So when we speak of God, we are speaking analogically of God, which means we are speaking from a particular perspective that is not necessarily exclusive to another perspective. So from one perspective, God is one. God is an absolutely unified entity. From another perspective, God has revealed that he is many, that he possesses diversity within his life, that he is both
Hmm.
unified and diverse. And I use the cube as an analogy. The cube is not it is not proving it, but it is showing that if somebody is going to reject the notion that God cannot be unified and diverse in equal ultimacy, then how are they going to handle the notion of a cube?
Yeah, no, I mean,
it's
I
it,
I agree with the cube analogy in the sense that you can have one object or one being that has different aspects to it. I mean, it's
Or how about
definitely
how about this? Let's
no
take
question about
let's
that.
take let let's take the issue of creation in a thought experiment, uh, and we just set God aside for the discussion. Not that we're eliminating it, but we're just talking about the creation. Is
Okay.
the creation, in terms of its ultimacy, unified or diverse?
From my perspective, or for what?
Yeah, yeah. What is how is creation? What is it ultimately? Is it ultimately unified or diverse?
I mean, it's kind of hard for me to answer that question apart from bringing God into it because I think he's what unifies everything. So I don't
Well,
really know
okay,
how.
okay, yeah. Well, we can agree that there's something that brings about the existence of the unity of creation. But the question
Yeah.
that's outstanding is what exemplifies the creation in terms of its ultimacy? Is its ultimacy in its unity or diversity?
Let me
Um,
let
I'm
me
not trying to dodge the question, Darth, but I just think from a theist perspective, it's very difficult for me to answer that question because I don't really think there's a proper
Oh,
answer to that without God.
no, no. I'm not saying that we think of creation relegated to exist without reference to God. I'm just saying let's just
Yeah.
focus on God's creation. That's all. I'm not saying the creation exists without God. I'm just saying let's just focus on the creation.
so
Hmm.
What exemplifies the ultimacy of creation? We're recognizing that God is the creator and sustainer. But in terms of its ultimacy that God has imposed, is its ultimacy in its unity or its diversity?
Um, I'm not really sure to how to answer that question.
let
Okay.
me interject here real quick. Muslim, or anybody for that matter, but Muslim.
Yeah.
So if I were to ask you, all of creation that has been created by the creator, is it diverse?
Yeah, in the sense that there are many different particulars.
Right. And did not the creator create diversity?
Yeah, yeah, of course.
And in that diversity, is there not unity?
Yes, in the sense that he holds
You
everything together.
believe that
Yeah.
he holds everything right. So the scripture verse that references that all things have been created are held together by him, right?
Yeah.
He controls, he orchestrates, he causes all things to work together, right? Do you agree with that?
Yeah, of course I agree with that. Yeah.
So, with that understanding, the question that was posed, is it easier to answer in the ultimacy question that you were just asked? Is it easier for you to understand? If you just agreed with me with what I just said, does that help in order? Because you said you wanted to ask a question about the Trinity, and I'm still waiting to hear if Darth has adequately answered your question. Because I honestly, personally, don't want this to become a dialogue between two people because there's other people here too. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. I mean, if that, I don't want to take up the stage. I mean, Darth, if you're comfortable, maybe we could just continue this discussion another time. I think it was pleasant, at least from my point of view. Is that something you'd be
Yeah,
willing to do, or?
I just followed you, so follow me back, okay? And
Okay, so maybe
I'm gonna
we
put
can
an
have a.
alarm on here so I'm notified, okay, when you're on.
Yeah,
Okay?
so maybe I'll create a room and we could just discuss it and similar to how we're doing now. I don't think there's been any issues.
Oh no, it's
We've
been
given
good.
each
No,
other
no,
time to speak and stuff.
don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I'm not complaining of anything, but I let you come up with with the
Yeah,
idea
no,
that
I understand.
yeah,
No
yeah, yeah.
problem.
And this is not going to be one of those rooms where it's going to be just two people talking. And I'd
Yeah,
like you
I
to
respect that.
participate. Yeah. Uh-huh. No, you're cool. You're cool. I got no problem with
All
you.
right, thanks, guys. I
Yeah.
appreciate the discussion. And Darth, I'll just maybe send you a message and we'll try to connect and continue the discussion elsewhere.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Thank
All
you,
right, and
Muslim.
yeah, and if you ever want any info or if you're seriously interested in getting in touch with Ryan, I can I can try to connect you guys.
Yeah,
He's
because
he's very accessible and he's a very nice guy.
you know what? I can just tell that from watching him. Like I said, I'm sure there will be certain things I disagree with him about. I mean, even reading through his material, there's some minor issues that I mean, relatively minor issues that I disagree with. However, I'm blown away at the level and the extent and the depth of study that he has done on this issue. And he has, even though his book, The End of the Timeless God, was not an easy read, and I understand because of the nature of the subject, he was able to take such complicated issues and to unpack it in such a way that somebody who's really motivated can really understand these issues, not having spent the gargantuan amount of time he must have put into studying this issue. And so I can just tell you, I'm just so appreciative of the work that he's done on this subject. I can't tell you. This is something that I've wanted answers to, or better explanations for several decades, and his material is an answer to prayer.
Yeah, thanks for visiting, Muslim man. You're welcome to visit anytime. I have to admit,
He's
when
working on a sequel to that, which is called From Divine Time Maker to Divine Watchmaker, in which
Is
he's
that a book? Because I know he has a paper on that.
yeah, he has a paper with a similar title, and that's
Right,
meant to be like sort of an introduction or a summary to
right,
some of
right.
the things that he's going to do in the book. But
Oh
he's
my
going to have an entire book
wow!
that's
Now,
expansive on that.
is there a
Yeah.
time estimate when that might be out?
I'm not sure because he's very busy. He's working on a lot of different things, but I can ask him and get back to you. And as a matter of fact, I actually have a draft, a whole copy of.
Say that again. You were breaking up. What about a draft?
Can you hear me better now, Darth?
Yes. What did you say about the draft?
Yeah, so I have an entire draft of the actual book that's supposed to come out. He's still
Oh my
working
gosh.
on and polishing it, but he sent it to me privately,
Um,
so I can't share it.
okay. Okay. Well, could you do me a favor? Could you ask permission? Because tell him he is an enthusiastic fanboy who would like to read it, that he's so impressed that I have an insatiable appetite for his knowledge on that subject.
oh my gosh,
Yeah,
this is
yeah, I'll
just
see. And by the way, Darth, I'm
I
actually
know, I'm being sycophantic. I know, I'm groveling.
no, it's
please.
cool.
Can I please, oh please, can you
Oh,
can you?
please,
Oh,
oh, please, please, can I have a copy?
anyway,
Yeah, do me a favor.
No,
Yeah,
but
send up. Yeah,
yeah, but he's actually yeah, so I'll ask him and I'll get back to you and let you know what he
I
says.
would,
But
I would be one happy camper if you did that for me.
yeah, sure, no problem.
I
And
would
by the
be, I
way,
would be, I would be like the Martians in Toy Story. Do you remember the Martians in Toy Story?
oh my
Excuse me, Toy
gosh,
Story.
wow,
The Martians go, "We are eternally grateful."
yeah,
this
and
is
just really quick, last thing I was gonna say is whether I'm able to send you a copy or maybe you'll purchase it when it comes out as well. I'm actually mentioned in the book in a footnote, so uh, you might be interested in that. So he's actually
Cool,
consulted
cool.
me
I
on a
tell
few
you,
things.
I am excited whether I get an early preview or when it comes out, because I'm going to tell you something. I was thrilled with that first book, and I was thrilled. In fact, I just got done reading uh, the Divine Time Maker paper and the From the Divine Time Maker to the Divine Watchmaker.
Yeah, it's a very good paper.
I just got done reading those papers several days ago, and I'm just going, wow, what it's so well written and well researched.
Yeah, a few of my friends have had a similar experience. I'll say that I actually agree with Mullins's position on time. So that's my position with respect to God as well. And
Yeah.
I gave him some resources from the Islamic perspective, and so that's why he
Oh,
mentions me in the
that's
book.
good. Well,
Yeah,
that's what's really nice about him is because he has a great breadth of resources that he just doesn't like. Let's say Anglo, from the Arabic tradition and even the Hindu tradition, which just goes to show you that he has a really good depth of understanding of the issue.
Yeah, yeah.
You
He's
know, it's
Awesome.
funny. It's because some of the sophist atheists on Clubhouse and Discord, as much as you and I agree on it, we're all probably in agreement that there are these sophist atheist philosopher speaker wannabes that try to bastardize the notion of time and use it as a hammer against Christians.
Yeah, I think that Darth, this is a much more. I mean, I'm a Muslim, so you probably don't care, but I think it's a much more defensible view, and it solves certain problems, like even the what you were bringing up before on the relational theory. You have this sort of well, in one aspect, the definition of it is a sort of circularity problem because you're
Mm-hmm.
using time in order to define time, and
Exactly.
then
Yes.
you have this idea of
That's right.
backwards causation. To
Yes.
even
Yes.
say that you have a second instance of time, you need the first instance, but
That
if
was
it's
a
relational,
brilliant.
then you
That
can't
was
really.
yeah.
Okay.
I
Yeah,
was
that's
blown.
a
All right.
very good argument.
You can tell
Um,
him that I was blown away at that. His presentation was not shallow, uh, and but his brilliance, I think, lies in his ability to break down extremely complicated issues into easily digestible form for those who
He's
are
a very
motivated
clear
to read it.
communicator.
Right, right. I,
all
I,
right, guys.
I,
I know you guys found the Holy Grail. Okay, you guys found the Holy
right.
Grail. You're fanboys. I get it.
Oh,
All right. So that's great. Enough of this slobber. Anyway.
come
All
on, come
right,
on. This
guys.
is
Well,
something I've
I'll
wanted to
be in
get to
touch with
for
you, Darth.
decades.
Yeah, I'll be in touch with you. I don't want to steal the show, and
Okay. All right. Shalom. Shalom, man. Okay.
Hey, Jackson,
Stephen.
imagine imagine I'm a car collector and I've been trying to find a barn find of a split window Corvette, and then you find it and it's like, oh my, I found it.
Yeah, and you drive it back and forth 10 times in front of the same person. I get it. Stephen.